Ever since Brad Weston, was 10 years old, I dreamed of becoming a Navy SEAL. The sports I became interested in and excelled at in high school were swimming, karate, and lacrosse, which I considered good preparation for becoming a SEAL. I also took survival courses and went to outdoor summer camps, again with the goal of preparing to fulfill my dreams. Many kids dream of growing to be 6'4", weighing 230 pounds and playing guard. I always wanted to be 5'10" inches and weigh 185 pounds, which is the average size of a Navy SEAL. If you want to be a Navy SEAL, being 6'4" inches and 230 pounds won't do you any good, because being that size creates problems in everything SEALs do except hand-to-hand combat. However, the Navy spends millions of dollars on training, weapons, and equipment so that you can avoid hand-to-hand combat as much as possible. I almost reached my goal. When I graduated from college, I was 5'11" inches tall and weighed 180 pounds. To fulfill my dream, I enrolled in a university with a Navy officer training program. During my 4 years in college, I excelled in rock. I have never been shy about declaring my purpose. For the first 2 years, my commanders said nothing. Around the middle of my 3rd year, they started trying to dissuade me. Petty Officer McNamara, who served as a career counselor of sorts for rock students, was especially persistent. Weston, you understand that you must first pass a physical and psychological test in order to be considered at all, and of those who pass the test, 80 to 90% drop out during training. This was his usual phrase. Yes, sir, I always answered. I was supposed to become an officer and formally become his boss after graduation, but until then there was no point in arguing with him. However, sir, I know I can do it, and I will never forgive myself if I don't try. You know that if you choose the Navy SEAL program and leave, you could be kicked out of the Navy entirely. You're too good a future officer for me to want to see that, the sergeant major began telling me a few months before graduation. I didn't really believe him that the Navy would spend tens of thousands of dollars on my training and not transfer me to another unit, because it just didn't make sense. But I forgot that logic and the armed forces do not mix well. I chose the Navy SEAL program after graduation. McNamara just shook his head and said, "Good luck." Most guys who drop out, if you even find out about it, since it's rarely publicized, will say they got injured, their grandma got an ingrown toenail, or their kid's dog ate chocolate and had her stomach pumped or something like that. In fact, they most likely dropped out because they lacked the mental toughness. And although I was the second from last person to drop out of my class, this is exactly what happened to me, much to my chagrin and hard to admit to myself because I lacked the fortitude. Who would have thought Sergeant McNamara was right? 2 weeks after I left, I received a letter from the Secretary of the Navy stating that the Navy currently has no vacancies for other officers, since all ROT graduates around the country had already made their selections and contract renewal rates were at an all-time high due to the state of the economy. Your commitment to the Navy is therefore considered fulfilled, and you are subject to honorable discharge. Then I decided that I would never fail again in my life due to lack of fortitude. The humiliation that I experienced then, I never wanted to experience again. Since my parents didn't have to pay a penny for my college education and were well off, they agreed to pay half of my law school expenses since my college degree didn't provide any viable career options given the state of the economy at the time. I had saved up some money myself and, by working part-time, I was confident that I could cover the rest. Even though I had long missed the application deadline, when a spot opened up at a decent law school in City X 3 days before classes started, I jumped at the chance. During the summer after my 2nd year of law school, because I was doing very well, and because the professor who ran the legal aid program for 3rd-year students favored me, I began to gain real experience. One of the events in which I participated was a volunteer day, held on Saturday, when specialists from various fields provided free consultations to everyone. Our booth, where I worked with a professor and 3 other students, was right next to the Megabank booth, where 3 young and ambitious account managers sat, supervised by a female vice president with a badge that said Amber Miller. The only way to describe Amber Miller is to say that she was a gorgeous woman. Long, slender legs, round hips, a cinched waist, ample breasts, long brown hair, a neat nose, full lips, piercing green eyes, and an elegant yet provocative outfit. She was simply the embodiment of a man's fantasy. I had already been in several relationships by then. I was almost 24, although none of them lasted more than 6 months. However, I had an affair with my mother's 39-year-old divorced friend, which gave me a lot of confidence in dealing with women. This wonderful experience meant that I was not embarrassed by the fact that Amber was most likely 10 years older than me. And even despite the age difference with Amber, I did not feel afraid of her. I offered to help Amber's people set up their stand. I was stronger than all three workers combined, and they had a heavy table and panels, so she smiled and said, "That would be great, Brad," while lightly touching my name tag as she said my name, a great start. The excuses I used to interact with Amber throughout the day were obvious to both my fellow volunteers and her staff, but everyone, including Amber herself, just smiled. She never dissuaded me. When we wrapped up work around 6 p.m., I declined the ride my professor suggested and helped Amber carry her things to her car. "Thank you so much for your help, Brad," she said in a languid voice. The touch of her hand was even more seductive as I shook her hand firmly but gently. It was a pleasure, and it was all for a good cause. "Between the two of us, I think we've helped at least 100 people in need today," I replied with a big smile. "I hope so," she laughed. "If you let go of my hand, I'll treat you to dinner," she continued with a sly smile. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, although I wasn't really sorry when I let go of her hand. "I need to eat. I will be very grateful." To look like a lawyer, I was wearing a jacket and tie, and Amber was wearing a stylish dress, so she took me to a restaurant that was several price points above anything I'd ever been to in City X. I tried not to show that he was impressed, when in fact he was, especially by her knowledge of the menu and wine list. I drank some wine, but enjoyed what I tried. We really hit it off. She was a well-read person, and I could pretend to be well-read. We turned out to have many common interests, including water sports. This was probably my best first date ever. Since Amber drank most of the wine, I offered to give her a ride home in her car, a Mercedes 500 SL, after thanking her sincerely for a wonderful dinner, and this is no exaggeration. She agreed. She lived on the 5th floor of a luxury condominium downtown, just 6 blocks from the law school and 7 from my apartment. When we entered the lobby of her building, she almost came close to me, put her hand on my chest, and asked, "Are you expecting me to invite you for a cup of coffee?" At that moment, I decided that I would be patient and willing to commit to a long-term relationship. She was the most beautiful and sexy woman I have ever gone on a date with. She was smart, funny, had at least some social awareness to spend her Saturday volunteering, and was wealthy to boot. Could there be anything better? I can't believe what I said next. "Amber, I'm expecting your phone number. I'm expecting you and I to go boarding and jet skiing next Saturday, and I'm expecting to fall in love with you, and that we will have a passionate long-term relationship." I continued with the same impudence. "Oh, yes, and by the way, the fact that I'm 24, 3 months later, but who's counting? And you're probably 29, although I was sure she was about 34, but she would have liked 29 better. It doesn't matter to me at all. The best relationship I've had so far was with a woman who was 18 years older than me, so when I called, don't you dare use that as an excuse to refuse my invitation." Then I extended my hand. "Do you have a business card with your number on it?" The look on her face was priceless. I mean, absolutely invaluable. I think she was expecting a one-time fling, but whatever she was expecting, it clearly wasn't what I said. When she finally recovered from her slack-jawed state, she reached into her purse, clumsily wrote her cell number on the back of a business card, and handed it to me with some hesitation. "Thank you," I said. I tucked the card into my jacket pocket, scooped her up, gave her the best kiss I could muster, set her back on her feet, smiled, and headed home to my apartment, feeling on top of the world. When I called her on Monday evening, the call went to voicemail. "Hi, Amber, this is Brad. I would really like to meet you this Saturday and go water skiing. Please call me back at XXX 555 555 if you are interested. I'd love to see you in a bikini. Wait, did I say that out loud? Ha ha ha. That's the playful ending I left in my message. She called me back 10 minutes later. We had a nice chat. She accepted my invitation. I told her that it would probably be in the company of 4 more of my classmates, 2 guys and 2 girls. I hope I don't look like an old lady next to your young colleagues, she said. I'd be very surprised if that happens unless you're wearing the tightest corset in history. I laughed. I'll call you to discuss the details. Now I just had to organize everything. There was a friend in my contracts class named Jeremy. I knew him enough to know that his parents lived in the suburbs, had a vacation home on a lake, and were very rich. He was a little shy, but obviously liked Sally and Jen, 2 of our classmates. I played everything according to the notes. I persuaded Sally and Jen to go on a water activity with me. I hope that neither of them thought that this was a date with me. And then I called Jeremy and gave him the opportunity to invite us all to his country house parents, taking with them their best friend. I borrowed a car, first picked up Amber, then picked up Sally and Jen. They lived in the same house, and we went to the lake. I think Sally and Jen were a little taken aback by Amber's presence, but they could tell she was older and she was wearing a long cape, so she didn't seem like a threat to them. Until they saw Amber in just a bikini. Frowning expressions immediately appeared on their faces, and satisfied smiles and quickly put on sunglasses appeared on the faces of Jeremy and his friend. The choice of water sports for this date was not accidental. I was excellent at them from my youth, including breaststroke swimming in the pool, thanks to which I became a member of my school's team. I was proud of my abs and overall physique, because even though I dropped out of the Navy SEAL training program, I still had the same body as I did back then. I could still do 30 pull-ups and an endless number of abdominal exercises. It was my mind, not my body, that failed me in training. Fortified by a few beers, and after the initial awkwardness, our day on the water went really well. We paddleboard and kayak, since Jeremy's parents had just about every water equipment imaginable, and we also water skiing and wakeboarding on their 24-foot Sea Ray yacht. I brought both vegetarian and meat dishes for lunch, and for dinner we all went to a local crab restaurant. By the end of the evening, it seemed to me that Jen was starting to take an interest in Jeremy, and Sally was starting to take an interest in his friend. As for me, I was amazed. Amber was absolutely incredible. After I dropped Jen and Sally home, I drove Amber to her house. This time, she didn't ask, "Brad, I will be very disappointed if after such a wonderful day you don't come upstairs to me." That morning, we had sex in the shower before she made blueberry pancakes and sausage. As I stuffed my 8th pancake into my mouth, I muttered, "Is there anything you can't do?" "What do you mean?" she asked with a smile. "You water ski like a pro, are a bank vice president at 29, have great sex, and make pancakes that are way better than Aunt Jemima's." "That's what I mean," I said, stuffing pancakes and sausage into my mouth. "About that. I'm 33, not 29, although thanks for deciding to pretend," she laughed. "I don't care, even though you're 53. You are simply incredible," I answered casually. When I got ready to leave around noon, she snuggled up to me. "Brad, I had a great day yesterday, and last night and this morning were even better. I hope to see you again, but I don't want you to take me seriously. I've been a party girl most of my life, and you're too young for me." I stared into her eyes without saying a word for a good 30 seconds until she began to fidget and feel uncomfortable. "You're not just a passing fancy for me. I've already fallen in love with you. At least I think I'm in love because I've never been in love before, and you make me feel like no one else. I'm looking for a serious relationship, not a fun time. If you change your mind, call me, but I won't be able to see you again if you are only looking for casual meetings and not a serious relationship." She was even more stunned than after my first speech after the volunteer day. I picked her up, gave her the best kiss, put her in her place, and walked out the door without looking back. As I entered the elevator, I glanced in her direction and saw her standing in the hallway, still dazed. When she didn't call after 2 weeks, I felt a little sad, but I took it philosophically. She was already too much for you, I said to myself. My classmate Jen, who thought we were going on a date when we went to the lake, was working as a summer intern at the same law firm as me. When she asked about Amber and I told her I hadn't seen her since the day after the lake trip, she started acting friendlier. We became friends with benefits for the rest of the summer, and it was fun, in fact fantastic. The only problem was that half the time I had sex with her, I was thinking about Amber. By the end of the summer, I began to wonder if Jen might be more than just a friend with benefits. In truth, Jen's only problem was that she wasn't Amber. Jen was beautiful, sexy, smart, compassionate, funny, and loyal. After convincing myself that I would never see Amber again, I began to seriously think about talking to Jen about a real relationship, perhaps marriage. During the second week of classes in my final semester, I was about to graduate 6 months early. I forgot to turn off my phone on Friday night, and it rang in the middle of the night, waking me up. Jen lay comfortably next to her. I looked at my iPhone screen, 3:37 am. The display showed the name Amber. "Hello," I muttered into the phone. I won't try to imitate Amber's speech because that would be too difficult. Suffice it to say that she was very inarticulate. With her occasional giggles, curses, moans, and belches out of the way, what follows is what I remember her saying. "Hey, Brad, this is Amber." "Yes, I know, Amber. I see your name on the identifier. Why are you calling me at 4:30 in the morning?" "Brad, you haven't called me for a long time, so I decided to call you. Plus, I have a problem now." "What is your problem?" "There are guys here who don't want to leave. Millie and I went to hang out with them, and now we don't like them, and they don't want to leave my apartment." I remembered Amber mentioning Millie. As far as I remembered, Millie was her best friend. She has a master's degree in medicine, works as the head nurse at a clinic, and teaches part-time at a local university. I didn't know her at that time, but I knew a little from Amber's stories. "Well, call the police. That's what they exist for." "I can't call the police. It will have a bad effect on my work. Plus, we don't want them to get arrested, just for them to leave." "Well, what do you want me to do?" "Brad, you're a former SEAL and a karate master. You can throw them out. Please, I will repay you with anything later." I didn't remind her that I dropped out of Navy SEAL training and that being a brown belt in karate didn't make me a master. "How many are there, Amber?" "4. I think so." "Okay, I'll come and talk to them. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Jen woke up. She heard my side of the conversation. "Are you really so pathetic that you would go save her after she hasn't spoken to you for several months?" "I have to, Jen. I can't let anything happen to her, even if I don't have feelings for her anymore," I muttered. "Can I borrow your car?" Jen turned her back to me. "The keys are on your dresser, idiot," she shouted. I didn't blame her for being angry. If there are 4 guys in there, I'm going to need a gun just in case, even if they're as drunk as Amber sounded. The only weapon that I had, but which I was very familiar with and even trained with, had the strange name Travel Key. The manufacturers apparently tried to disguise it as a tool, so they made hexagonal holes in it and labeled it Travel Key. The travel key is actually an angled piece of very hard, but lightweight plastic with a ring at one end through which the user inserts their index finger and a handle with finger indentations in the middle. When you hold it, the free angle extends beyond the hand, acting much like brass knuckles if you hit an opponent with it. I got to Amber's apartment in 10 minutes and parked illegally on the street. She let me in, and when I got out of the elevator, I saw a really big guy coming out of her apartment. He must have been 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighed about 280 pounds. "Damn," I thought to myself. "I hope he's really drunk and leaving, and that the other 3 are smaller." When I approached him, he glanced sideways at me and asked, "Are you the damn ninja who's going to kick us out?" "I'm not a ninja, but I hope I can persuade you to leave." "I see you're already leaving, so I hope you'll just continue on your way," I said firmly, but not threateningly. Hell no, I'm going to have sex with Amber again, he said, pushing me against the wall and turning back to her apartment. Fortunately, he was really drunk. Otherwise, I would never have defeated him, even with the travel key. I had to use force to throw all the guys out. When I returned, Amber and Millie, both completely drunk, began to thank me while trying to touch me. Millie turned out to be almost as beautiful as Amber. Brad, why? Amber began to say. But I left, got into Jen's car, and drove away. 45 minutes later, I returned to my apartment. I sighed in relief when I saw Jen was still in the bedroom. But I didn't like that she sat up on the bed and looked at me. Now that my car is back, I can get the hell out of here, she said angrily. I tried to calm her down and persuade her to stay, but she didn't say another word while she got dressed. I'm sorry, Jen, I'm really sorry, I called after her as she ran out the door. Wonderful, I thought. There were already great relationships and great sex. Obviously, Amber being a wuss wasn't worth it. Starting at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, my phone started ringing every 15 minutes. It was Amber, leaving one message after another. I didn't want to answer or listen to them. At first, I wanted to try to make things right with Jen. I tried to call Jen several times, but she seemed to treat me the same way I treated Amber by not answering her calls. After 3 unsuccessful attempts to call, I went to her house. She opened the door. I'm really sorry, Jen, I started to say as soon as the door opened. She raised her hand to indicate that she wanted me to stop, and then gave a prepared but very convincing closing speech. Brad, you were honest with me from the beginning and told me you still thought about Amber. I started with a light heart, not thinking about feelings, but I couldn't help myself. I fell in love, and until the last moment I hoped that you would fall in love too, because you treated me better than anyone. But last night showed how stupid my dream was. I'll handle it until Monday and will remain your friend, but there will be no more privileges. With these words, she slammed the door. Wow, she's going to be a great lawyer, I said to myself as I left her house, feeling terrible. I walked for a long time before returning home, and who do you think was there? Amber sitting at my door. I sighed. I don't know how you found me, Amber, I said, but now is not the right time. She jumped up, blocked my path, and grabbed me by the lapel of my jacket. I only want a relationship with you, she blurted out and tried to kiss me. Wait, why didn't you call me? I clearly told you, after our trip to the lake, what I need. I began, but she interrupted me. I've thought about you every day since then. I want you to give me a chance. I know last night was hard for you because you didn't even come back to accept my thanks. But you won't regret it, she continued, starting to cry. This time I didn't stop her when she kissed me. Maybe we should talk, I said, opening the door to my apartment. I motioned for her to sit across from me at the kitchen table. These chairs were uncomfortable. I didn't want either of us to feel comfortable. I have a lot of questions about how compatible we might be, Amber, despite all your good qualities. What I saw last night really shocked me. I will not try to make excuses or insult you. Millie is a bad influence on me. I've had too much to drink, and I get too passionate when I drink. I know that this is not possible, but I did it anyway. In one sense, it's a good thing, because the way it got out of control ensures that I'll never do it again. It made me realize, especially after you saved me and Millie, that I not only want a relationship with you, I need it. She sobbed a little. I've never begged a man for anything before. I don't know how to do this. Tell me what I need to do. I sat and looked at her for a long time, maintaining eye contact. I don't think we both blinked once. Even in jeans and a regular blouse, without makeup, she was incredibly attractive. The thought flashed through my head, you shouldn't give up this chance. I'm not sure your ego can handle the 3 conditions I'm going to put forward, I said. Try it, she replied with a determined look on her face. First, we are completely exclusive unless one of us officially ends our relationship. This applies to both sexual and romantic relationships. Second, you undergo a full set of tests, and we do not enter into intimacy until you bring me a certificate of complete health in writing. She winced slightly, but it only lasted a second. Then she pulled herself together again, although her eyes watered a little. Third, you are buying me a pearl necklace, an actual pearl necklace, for the woman I was in a relationship with when you called on Friday night. Well, technically Saturday morning, and ended it. Which necklace exactly, was her first question. The kind you would wear to a social event, something you would be happy with. I didn't know anything about pearls. All I knew was that Jen wanted one, but a law school student couldn't afford it. I was sure that this would not be a problem for Amber. Can we meet until the test result comes back? Was her second question. Yes, but not until you bring me the necklace, I replied. She smiled widely, stood up, pecked me on the lips and said, "Meet me at the Chart House restaurant at 7 p.m. tonight. Dress smart casual and come hungry. You will be pleased with the necklace." I was sure that this would happen. Amber handed me the box with the necklace as soon as she arrived at the restaurant at 6:55 p.m. Well, I was excited too and came early. I looked into the box and it took my breath away. "Wow, that looks expensive," I whispered. "How much did it cost?" "About 1/50th of what even a short relationship with you would cost. Let's just say this woman." She then paused, waiting for me to say the name. I shrugged and said to myself, why not? "Jen. Let's just say Jen will be pleased, very satisfied, so satisfied that she wants to sleep with you, but you will resist." She laughed and then hugged me. That evening, Amber and I became close again over dinner and a walk along the boardwalk. Since we knew the evening wouldn't end with sex, it took the pressure off and allowed us to just enjoy each other's company. We kissed passionately goodbye, but as far as I know, most diseases are not transmitted that way. I waited until Monday to give the necklace to Jen. She was friendly but wary when we talked. "After the administrative law lecture, I have something for you," I told her as we walked into the only class we had taken at the same time this semester. She looked at me skeptically but nodded, "Okay." In the square after the lecture, I picked up the box and said, "This is a sign of reconciliation and the biggest sorry that I can offer. Please accept it." She took the box, looked inside, cried, and ran away with it. 2 days later, she told me how much she liked the necklace, then smiled and showed me a peace sign. I smiled back. She became my best friend for the rest of the semester. And Amber, after her tests came back negative, became my best friend outside of school. And sex with her was even better than during our first affair. She was simply incredible. By the time I graduated from law school 4 months later, there was no doubt in my mind that I was madly in love with Amber, and if she wasn't a pathological liar and a great actress, then she was madly in love with me too. I got a job in the public defender's office, borrowed money from my parents to buy Amber a decent, though not as fancy as a pearl necklace ring, and asked her to marry me. Luckily, I proposed to Amber at her condominium after a fun evening of bowling and pool. To my surprise, she really enjoyed it. Without saying a word, she nodded for me to place the ring on her finger. When I did this, she said in her most languid voice, "Actions speak louder than words," and turned into a real predator. The next day, I moved into her condominium, and 3 months later, we got married. How she managed to organize such a large wedding in such a short time, I only found out later. She chose the date, paid the deposit, and already hired a wedding planner 3 months before I proposed. Surprisingly, neither her parents nor mine made a big deal about the age difference. Our mothers were calm because they felt that we really loved each other. I knew my father wouldn't mind once he saw her bikini photo. Her father approved of me when I insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect her assets, although I also had my own motives, a fidelity clause. I was very generous in the financial terms of the prenuptial agreement I drafted, which was appropriate considering she was now the executive vice president of Megabank and in charge of statewide operations, while I was a very underpaid public defender. She didn't say anything about the fidelity clause, she just signed it. I had one issue that needed to be discussed carefully, but which needed to be resolved before the wedding. Amber's friend Millie was, shall we say, a wild child. Although Millie seemed to like me, why shouldn't she? Since I saved her the first time we met, I was worried that she might throw something wild at Amber's hen party, since she was a bridesmaid at the wedding. So I invited her to lunch to talk face to face. After some small talk, I got down to business. I had to be careful because all the men in the restaurant were staring at us. As I said, Millie was second only to Amber in appearance among all the women I had ever interacted with. Millie, I really like you, and I think you're the best friend Amber could ever have. So I'm asking you to do something that I think is in her best interests. I began with a smile. I'd love to help in any way I can, Brad, she purred. Well, I don't know if Amber told you, but I really, really value loyalty. Even though I am madly in love with Amber, the condition of that love is fidelity, and I have heard some stories about wild bachelorette parties in our fair city, I said with a serious expression on my face. I noticed that Millie felt a little uneasy. Oh, really? And what did you hear? Well, all sorts of stories about how some of the bride's friends get her drunk and then have sex with her. I don't know how much of this is true, but other than you, I don't know Amber's friends very well. Because I know and respect you, I was hoping that you could make sure nothing like that happened to Amber. I continued, trying to maintain eye contact, although Millie's gaze sometimes wandered. Oh, was all she could say at that moment. I could see that she was uncomfortable. The reason this would really help Amber is because I truly believe that she loves me and wants to marry me. If I find out she slept with someone at a bachelorette party or anywhere else for that matter, there won't be a wedding. I'll have the marriage annulled or divorced, depending on when it comes out. After a few seconds of hesitation, Millie smiled tightly and said, You don't have to worry, Brad. I know that Amber understands your position and would never do such a thing, and as her witness and best friend, I promise that I will intervene if one of her friends tries to get her drunk into unconsciousness. Thank you so much, Millie, I said with a big smile, shaking her hand. Then we only talked about fun and light things, and she even insisted on paying for lunch, even though I invited her. I know you have a lot of expenses associated with your wedding. Let me take care of this, okay? She said tactfully. I haven't heard of any bad things that could happen at the bachelorette party, at least not as far as Amber is concerned. I'm sure Millie relayed our conversation to Amber verbatim. Life married to Amber has been, in a word, fantastic. We seem to be compatible in every aspect, although different and independent enough to not be clingy or boring. Our sex life was as good as it could be. Like everyone, the passion of the first few months faded over time, but we both clearly enjoyed all aspects of our sexual relationship. It also didn't bother me that Amber made so much more than I did, or that she owned most of the property we shared. It just wasn't important, and she never used it against me or mentioned it or let others do it. After working as a public defender for 3 years, I took a job as an assistant district attorney in City X. I really enjoyed punishing bad guys more than defending them. As a public defender, I believed that only about 5% of the people I defended were innocent, and another 10% or so were guilty, but not of the crimes they were accused of. However, I did my best to protect the guilty, although it did not bring me pleasure. I had been working as an assistant district attorney for just over a year when something serious happened. I have already earned a reputation as a tough but fair prosecutor and a good trial lawyer. The head of our prosecutor's office entrusted me with the most difficult cases, and I willingly took them on. One case was especially sweet because the scoundrel I accused was also on trial in suburb Y, one of the closest suburbs to City X, and Jen worked there as an assistant district attorney. It was nice for us to meet again, as I had only seen her a few times since graduating, including the time she wore the pearl necklace I gave her to my wedding, which was not lost on Amber, although she took it seriously. Humor. Of course, I never told Jen that Amber bought the necklace. During this case, I learned from Jen how her prosecutor's office was organized. This was different from the way our prosecutor's office was organized. There was more ethics in her office. I began to wonder and came to the conclusion that my district attorney was corrupt, dismissing cases under suspicious circumstances and prosecuting some people we should not have brought to justice. With the assistance of our state's attorney general, I convened a grand jury, working with an assistant state attorney. Although this was supposed to remain secret, the district attorney found out about it and tried to fire me. I fought as hard as I could. I took seriously my promise after failing SEAL training to never again fail because of a lack of fortitude. The mayor and governor supported me when I showed them the evidence I had collected. The prosecutor was placed on administrative leave. Some of the charges were so serious that when they appeared on the front page of the city's main newspaper, the public began to doubt the entire prosecutor's office. In a rare collaboration between the mayor and the governor, I, the second most junior assistant district attorney, was appointed interim district attorney. There were 6 assistants in the prosecutor's office older than me. I got along with everyone except one. 3 of them did not want to take on temporary responsibilities. 2 responded well after I had a frank conversation with them, and the one with whom I did not get along resigned. I immediately replaced him with a female prosecutor from another county who wanted to work in the city. There were several shortcomings in the position of interim district attorney. One of them was about my relationship with Amber. I had to work more hours. I knew she didn't like it, but I assured her that I would not run for district attorney in the election that was to take place in about 14 months. The city charter did not require a special election, and the mayor was happy to allow me to complete the term of the suspended district attorney. Amber and I discussed the future when I accepted the position of interim district attorney. We agreed that as soon as a new prosecutor was elected, we would begin planning for the birth of children. About 6 months into my tenure as interim DA, 4 nights in a row, when I returned home earlier than planned, Amber was not home. It was 4 nights in a row on Tuesdays and Fridays. I didn't ask her where she was when she returned, and she didn't say anything. We didn't have sex on those nights, but she acted warm as usual. One night, I thought her clothes smelled like some kind of illegal substance. We discussed using it before we got married because it could damage my reputation as a criminal lawyer, and we discussed it again when I became an assistant district attorney, when it became even more important. I was confused about what to do, but the following Tuesday I rented a car and parked illegally outside Amber's office. One policeman approached me, but I showed him my dad and politely told him that I was on duty. She smiled and left, wishing him luck, probably wondering why the DA was doing the surveillance himself, but deciding it was none of her business. The parking lot where Amber left her car was across the street from her building. At approximately 5:30 p.m., I saw her leaving the building, walking next to a man. I immediately recognized him from the social events organized by Megabank. It was John Barnes, senior vice president of the bank, about 45 years old, tall, handsome, with black hair slightly touched with gray at the temples, and unmarried. He had a bad reputation as a ladies' man. As Amber's car pulled out of the parking lot, I followed her. The red Mercedes 500 SL isn't that hard to track down, even for a newbie like me. She pulled up to the large house in suburb Y just as John was getting out of his car in the driveway. As soon as Amber got out of the car, they immediately held hands and entered the house, which clearly belonged to him. I was shocked, amazed, and devastated. I was also completely confused because, other than Amber not being home at 4 in the evening and the fact that I smelled something on her clothes one day, I didn't notice any change in her behavior. Moreover, there was no change in our satisfactory, at least on my part, sexual relationship. I stayed to watch, and soon the Chinese eatery brought them food. When it got dark, and by my count about an hour after they were supposed to have finished dinner, I crept up to the house. I was able to look into the living room through a poorly closed curtain and see Amber sitting on the couch without a top, smiling. That was enough. I walked up to Amber's car. Despite my numerous warnings, she left the door unlocked. Wearing gloves, I opened the hood, disconnected the 3 ignition wires, and closed it back. I knew that neither she nor Barnes would figure out how to fix this little thing, so they would have to call a mechanic or a tow truck, and there would be a record of it somewhere. I couldn't resist and flattened one of the tires of Barnes' car. I didn't damage it, I just let the air out using a regular pressure gauge. Childish, I know, but it calmed me down a little, although very briefly. After that, I returned to the office and immediately began collecting information. I had no intention of going back to Amber that night, and I certainly didn't want to sleep next to her. In 3 hours, I learned a lot of interesting things about Mr. Barnes. I had access to databases that Megabank or his previous employers did not have access to. I found out that he had one arrest for possession of a controlled substance in another state, but since the number was small and the laws in that state were more lenient than in ours, he got off with community service. I also found out that neighbors on both sides of his house were suing him over various property dispute claims. I had a clear plan of action by the time I finally returned home, luckily finding Amber already asleep. The next morning, I left for work before Amber woke up and didn't leave her any note. When I got to the office, I called Jen and asked if she knew any patrol officers she had a good relationship with who worked in the area where Barnes' house was located on Fridays. She checked and called back. The two patrol officers who work in this area on Fridays are the ones I used to work with. I am on good terms with one of them because I helped her with a personal legal matter. What's happening? I explained to Jen what I wanted to do. She concluded that what I was asking was completely legal and agreed to help. That same day, Wednesday, I filed a marital interference claim against Barnes in Suburb Y, but have not yet filed it in court. Before the claim was served, it would have been easy to miss in court records. Using a burner phone, I called Barnes's neighbor, with whom he was having the most heated argument. "Mr. Smith, this is someone who has a beef with your neighbor, John Barnes. I would like to help you achieve a favorable settlement of your claim against him." "You intrigue me," Smith replied. "I hate that son of a bitch. If I call you this Friday night and give you the go-ahead, will you be able to call the police and report the noise and smell of illegal substances coming from Barnes' house?" "Can I be held accountable for this?" he asked. I assure you that no, although I cannot reveal all the reasons, but one of them is that there will actually be illegal substances in the house. "So to be clear, all I have to do is make one call?" Smith asked. "Yes, and I am 99% sure that in the coming days Barnes himself will initiate a settlement favorable to you," I replied. "I look forward to your call, happy to help," Smith concluded. Things were awkward at home on Wednesday night. I didn't hide my emotions well, but Amber was very sensitive and immediately sensed that something was wrong. She didn't have to be a genius to confirm her suspicions when I refused sex, saying my stomach hurt. I have never refused sex in our entire married life, and she has only refused sex a couple of times. On Thursday, she called me at work and asked if we could have lunch together. I said I'm too busy. She suggested going out for dinner, and I didn't want to completely ruin my plans, so I agreed. At dinner, I played my part quite well, and then I couldn't refuse sex a second time without ruining everything. Friday was X day. I followed her to Barney's house again, and an hour after the Chinese courier arrived, I went home and called Barnes's neighbor on the way. I had to return my rental car. Later, I called Jen, and she said there had been an arrest at Barnes' house. I assumed that both Barnes and Amber had been arrested, so when I got home, I was shocked to see Amber there. "Hi, honey," she said anxiously. "Have you eaten, or do you want me to cook something?" I couldn't stand this lie anymore. I secretly started recording on my iPhone and asked, "So, not sleeping with Barnes tonight?" She turned pale. "What do you mean?" "Well, you've been sleeping with him for the last few Tuesdays and Fridays, and God knows how long before that, so I'm just wondering why you're not with him today." She collapsed into a chair, completely defeated. I felt no sympathy for her when I continued. "Admit it, this is your only chance for reconciliation," which was a lie. She began to sob. "Sorry, Brad. You're right, but I broke up with him today. I didn't sleep with him today, and I never will again, not with him, not with anyone else but you. I promise." I turned off recording on my phone. It seemed to me that you already made such a promise to our parents and friends more than 3 years ago. I guess you had your fingers crossed behind your back then, huh? I had already packed my things and booked a hotel room for a long stay. As I grabbed my bags and headed for the door, she screamed, "No, you can't leave. It was just a stupid mistake. I love only you." I didn't even turn around to listen to her. At first, and I emphasize, at first, everything went exactly according to plan. Around noon on Saturday, Barnes called me on my cell phone. When I saw his number, I immediately started recording on my iPhone. In our state, the consent of one party is sufficient to record a telephone conversation. "Hey, I'm not sure if you remember me, but we've met a couple of times. This is John Barnes," he began. To relax him, I replied, "Yes, I know you. You are the asshole who sleeps with my wife." There was a pause. Well, I'd like to talk to you about how to settle the marital interference suit you filed against me. I don't want this to become public knowledge." "I thought you hadn't been notified of the lawsuit yet," I said, knowing that he had not been notified, but knowing that Jen had shown him the documents at my request. If she did everything as planned, she demanded that he settle his current court cases before she would consider pressing charges against him, and released him on bail for the weekend so he could think about his actions. Otherwise, he would have to wait until Monday for a bail hearing. I was not served with official documents, but someone brought this matter to my attention, he continued. After a few words, he asked, "How long will it take to get this settled right now before the case goes to trial?" $150,000 and a written confession that you slept with her. I use the confession only in court proceedings without making it public. This is not up for debate. Either you agree or forget about it. And as soon as I give you the documents, everything will become public, I replied, showing determination. After a short pause, he began, "What about?" I interrupted him. "What of what I said is not clear to you? Call me within an hour and give me an answer. If I don't hear back, there won't be a deal. If you agree, I will email you the confession, and unless you have it notarized and sent back by the end of the day, there will be no deal. I need the money by Wednesday." With these words, I hung up. He called back and agreed. I emailed him a confession where he admitted that he slept with Amber on 3 Tuesdays and 2 Fridays. I excluded the last Friday night as he confirmed that Amber ended the relationship then. He signed this confession with a notary and gave it to me via courier until 17 o'clock. I sent him the settlement agreement and told him to sign it and submit it with a check for $150,000 by Wednesday, and then he would be free. "And then you can sleep with her as much as you want," I told him at the end. I called Barnes' neighbor from a burner phone. He confirmed that Barnes had completely conceded in their property dispute, and added that a neighbor on the other side told him that Barnes had done the same to him. He thanked me profusely. I called Jen from the same phone number, and she confirmed that everything went as planned. Officers found enough in his home to charge him with possession with intent to distribute. When I came to see him in prison 2 hours after his arrest, he was like a drowning man clutching at straws. He immediately agreed to settle his 3 lawsuits. His face paled when I showed him the lawsuit from you to prove he was a good citizen and to accept 100 hours of community service in exchange for my not pursuing the case. I thought he was going to kiss my feet when I negotiated his release so he wouldn't have to sit in jail all weekend. "I owe you," I told Jen. "Oh yes, in debt," she replied with a sinister laugh and hung up. Amber called my cell phone about 10 times on Saturday, each time leaving a message begging me to call back. At least I think so, because I only listened to the first and 10th messages and deleted the rest without listening. On Monday morning, just as Amber was getting ready for work, she was served with divorce papers that stated that our assets would be split 50/50 in accordance with her violation of the fidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement. The employee who handed her the documents in the lobby of her condominium said she had to be helped into a chair, and after a minute she stood up and returned to the elevator without opening the envelope. Also on Monday, I executed a new power of attorney in my brother's name, naming him as my medical and financial representative, replacing Amber, and added a codicil to my will, naming my brother and parents as sole heirs. I put the original documents in my personal bank safe and sent copies to my brother. On Wednesday, I received a signed agreement and a check for $150,000 from Barnes. The agreement also contained a clause stating that if I were seriously injured or died within the next 10 years, Barnes would have the onus to prove that he was not involved, or he would owe me or my estate $250,000. I felt so smug, arrogant even. That feeling left me Friday morning at 9, and when I received a call from Family Court Judge Susan St. John's office, informing me that I was required to appear for a hearing at 2 p.m. I was confident. I was able to negotiate a $150,000 settlement for a marital interference claim against Amber's lover, even though such claims are complete nonsense in our state, and I further hurt him by having to settle property disputes with both neighbors. I filed for divorce on Amber on Monday, and she seemed devastated. Yes, I was very smug. But on Friday morning, the smug smile disappeared from my face. The call from Family Court Judge Susan St. John's office threw me off balance. I thought I knew everything I needed about the relationship between the family and criminal courts in which I practiced and the general procedures before family judges, but that did not include waiting for a call from the judge less than a week after the case was filed. I was acting as my own lawyer and suddenly felt unsure, so I called one of my former law school classmates who was doing family law full-time and asked her a few questions. Then I did more research. While this is not the case everywhere, in our state, not only is family court completely separate from criminal court, the judges, the courthouse, and even the rules are different, but the enforcement is also different. The family court works with the sheriff. My office works with the Metropolitan Police. The annual charity softball game between the two units was canceled 3 years ago because the animosity between them spilled onto the playing field that'll give you an idea of their relationship. Although there is some truth to the old saying, "A lawyer who defends himself has a fool for his clients," I did not hire another lawyer because no one else would have demonstrated the same iron grip and mental toughness as me. It could have put his career in jeopardy, and they just wouldn't have done what I knew needed to be done. Amber was represented by lawyers from Compton, Gerald and Casey, the largest and most expensive old firm in the state, not just City X. They had political connections to almost every legislator on both sides of the aisle, the mayor and the governor. Despite Amber's wealth, I knew that megabank money was behind it. I had a feeling that the megabank president wanted it all gone, and that Compton, Gerald, and Casey were permanently employed by megabank. When I walked into the courtroom, there sat a dejected, beautiful, elegantly dressed Amber Miller. We both kept our maiden names after we got married. She tried unsuccessfully to meet my eyes. The opposing side had 3 lawyers. I don't understand why they needed 3. The lead attorney was the head of the old firm's family law department, Jim Casey, the younger brother of one of the firm's founders. He came up to me before the judge arrived and said, "Mr. Weston, nice to meet you. I'm Jim Casey," holding out his hand. I wanted to make it clear right away what this matter would be like. "I know who you are, Mr. Casey. If I were here as a lawyer, I would feel obligated by professional ethics to shake your hand and chat. However, I am here as a cheated husband who was cheated on by his wife, and now she wants to keep her money. Therefore, I refuse any attempt at comradeship between us. It'll be a street fight if she doesn't capitulate, and I fight dirty." After this speech, I sat down. Casey froze for a few seconds and then trudged back to his seat. I think Amber heard it because I heard sobbing from the other side of the aisle, but I didn't look to make sure. The hearing began with my speech. "Mr. Weston, Mrs. Miller filed the request for an emergency hearing, not you, so we'll have to let them speak first," Judge Susan St. John chided me. "I usually respect that, Your Honor, but I want to be clear. I don't want her to use up her assets to pay 3 lawyers for the most expensive law firm in town, so that when I get 50% of what I'm entitled to, that amount isn't significantly reduced. I want it to be clear from the outset that the assets will be shared as of Monday, the date of service, and not after she hired Mr. Casey's firm. Mr. Weston, you are getting too ahead of yourself. I haven't even decided yet whether there are grounds for divorce, so sit down and let Mr. Casey speak," the judge said impatiently. I realized that something was fishy here. Casey gave an emotional speech that there had been a misunderstanding, that Mrs. Miller had always been a good wife who supported her husband financially, and that she was shocked by this turn of events. He asked the court not to grant a divorce without an attempt to save it, and that Mrs. Miller would like the court to order counseling, which she would be willing to pay for out of her share of the assets if the tragedy of divorce did occur. The judge was about to make a decision. "Wait," I shouted, standing up illegally. "They haven't listened to me yet." "What is it, Mr. Weston?" she said impatiently. "I don't want counseling, I want a divorce. There is no one in the world who can convince me to give up a divorce. The only question is how much each of us will receive. I don't agree to counseling, so don't schedule it." I said words that no lawyer forced to appear before this judge again would ever say. "I make the decisions here, not you, Mr. Weston. I am scheduling 6 months of counseling on Tuesdays and Thursdays, after which we will consider divorce if at all necessary." She barked and slammed the gavel. "Wait a minute, I know this is kangaroo court, but I have something to say," I said, jumping up. "How dare you, Mr. Weston, you want a contempt charge," she growled. "If this frees me from consultations, that would be great. One thing you didn't consider is that I am the district attorney of this fine city. I pursue criminals on behalf of, and to protect its citizens, including you, Mr. Casey, and my soon-to-be ex-wife. I cannot attend consultations on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and your own rules stipulate consultations on Saturdays for no longer than 2 months, so your order violates your own rules," I managed to say before she interrupted. "These are just recommendations, and more is required here. You can work with your wife on a suitable schedule, but she must agree to it," the judge responded sharply. "If you don't show up for counseling, I will hold you for contempt and arrest you." Let's not be misleading. Now, speaking as the district attorney, for the record, with a stenographer noting, I am formally warning you and everyone else involved in the case that if any member of my office is arrested for failure to appear for a consultation that does not take place on or after the weekend 2 months, then anyone associated with the arrest will themselves be arrested by the Metropolitan Police for obstruction of justice, and my office will initiate criminal proceedings, I said in my most authoritative and sarcastic tone. With these words, I collected my papers, stood up, and headed towards the exit. On the way, I saw the shocked faces of everyone on the other side of the aisle. It seemed that Casey was 1 step away from a heart attack. Amber just looked at me with her mouth open. I was already out into the aisle when Judge St. John shouted, "Are you threatening me, Mr. Weston?" I responded, this time in a respectful tone, "No, I was simply voicing the position of the City District Attorney's office. Do I still need to be here?" I saw steam coming out of her ears. I stood there as she glared at me for about 30 seconds before she said, "I will make an order today, and it must be followed," then slammed the gavel again and walked out of the courtroom as the stunned bailiff announced, "Court is adjourned." Judge St. John obviously didn't believe me. That same day, she sent an order, a copy delivered personally to my office, scheduling mandatory consultations every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 months, starting 4 days later at 3 p.m. in a suburb about 10 miles from my office. I saw this coming, so I asked the police chief to come to my office on Monday morning. Chief Matson was a veteran who had been through thick and thin. He saw everything except what I was going to offer him. He and I had a good relationship even when I was a public defender because I always treated him with respect and valued his opinion. As district attorney, he knew I was a serious believer in law and order and would stand by his cops unless there was serious misconduct on their part. I explained to him what I wanted and who I wanted to help me. "Are you sure about this, Brad?" he asked after he exhaled in a whistle. "I've never heard anything like this before. You're looking for trouble." "Chief, I probably never told you, but I pulled out of SEAL training a few days before the end of selection because I wasn't mentally tough enough. I vowed that this would never happen again. This is as important to me as getting into the SEALs was back then, and I'm not going to fail again. Will you talk to Hampton and Surratt's to help me?" Hampton and Surratt's were 2 very tough cops. They once tangled with sheriff's deputies at an annual charity softball game 3 years ago. It was this fight that led to the game being finally canceled. Chief Matson looked at me for a few seconds, then chuckled, stood up, shook my hand, and said, "Okay, good luck." When I spoke to Hampton and Surratt's later that day, they were delighted, as if I had offered them a trip to Hawaii at my expense, rather than asking them to help arrest law enforcement people. After I didn't show up for a mandatory consultation on Tuesday, the consultant called me. I told her that I had already made it clear that I would never come for a consultation on a weekday. She called again on Thursday when I didn't show up, and I asked her what she didn't understand from our last conversation. She said she would report this to the court. Through my little informant in the family court, I learned, as expected, that by 9 a.m. on Friday, Judge St. John had issued an order for my arrest through the sheriff, but the arrest was going to take place toward the end of the day so that I could spend the weekend in jail. I took the initiative and showed up at the sheriff's office at noon, telling him I was leaving for the weekend in 10 minutes, and if he had anything for me, it needed to be done right away. The sheriff handed me a writ of arrest from Judge St. John, and one of his deputies immediately arrested me. I warned the deputy that if he did this, he would be obstructing justice and would himself be arrested by the police. He arrested me anyway. My friend, who was a criminal lawyer, was waiting nearby. As soon as I was arrested, he called and gave me the name of the deputy sheriff who did it. An hour after I was arrested and booked, my friend secured my release on a personal recognizance basis. As I was about to leave the sheriff's office, Hampton and Surratt's showed up with a warrant for the deputy's arrest and big smiles on their faces, greeting cheerfully, "Good afternoon, Mr. District Attorney." I simply smiled back. I didn't stay there longer. I could still hear the screams when I stepped onto the sidewalk, and I just grinned to myself, thinking that this was only a mild attack compared to what would happen when they arrested Judge St. John. On Friday at 6 p.m., the mayor himself called me in a panic. "Brad, what the hell is going on? Did you arrest the deputy sheriff and the family court judge? Are you crazy?" "No, Mr. Mayor. They obstructed justice and were warned," I replied. He shouted, "I don't care. Release them from prison immediately. They should not spend the weekend there. As you say, Mr. Mayor. But the warrant remains in effect, and I intend to pursue them," I replied firmly. He fell silent for a few seconds. "We'll discuss the future, just release them now." I personally went to the prison and secured the release of Deputy and Judge St. John. As the judge was being released, she yelled at me. I turned my trusty recorder back on. "You're going to pay for this, Weston bastard. I will never give you a divorce." I turned off the app and, holding up my iPhone, said with as much sarcasm as possible, "You're right, Your Honor. Either you recuse yourself or the chief judge of your little kangaroo court will do it for you." She ran out of the courtroom, angrier than ever. There must have been a lot of phone calls over the weekend, because on Monday morning the chief judge of the criminal court, where my assistants and I often appeared, called me and asked me to come see him. After some pleasantries, he invited me into his office. "Brad, I need to talk to you informally about something." "Sorry, Your Honor, but I know what will be discussed, and I'm afraid I can't speak off the record," I replied politely. "You're putting yourself in a meat grinder, son, and I don't want that. You're a good district attorney, and I personally like you, but after the election you'll be out of a job if you don't change your mind about family court." "I'm right. Everything was a setup, and now everything will change. I truly appreciate your advice, but I have already made my choice," I replied calmly. He looked at me with a sad smile. "I hope you enjoy your next job," he said with the same smile, shaking my hand. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sure it will be so," I answered and left. I saw him shaking his head in the reflection of the glass panel at the entrance to his office. 2 days later, I received a call, and another hearing was scheduled in family court for 2 p.m. Amber was there with another lawyer and a new judge, Samuel O'Connor. The lawyer did not try to talk to me. Judge O'Connor got down to business immediately. Judge St. John recused herself, and the case was assigned to me. I quashed her counseling order and the contempt charge against Mr. Weston. The purpose of this hearing is to determine a schedule for consultation that is mutually agreeable. Mr. Weston, what day is convenient for you to attend consultations once a week for the next 2 months? Your Honor, I believe that consultations are a waste of time, and I object to their appointment at all, I replied in the respectful tone that I always used in criminal court. I understand you, Mr. Weston. However, I have seen many couples in much worse situations than you describe in your lawsuit, and they ended up happily married. I am not ready to write off this marriage until I receive a report from a professional consultant. So, when is convenient for you? Saturday morning, anywhere in the city, but not in the suburbs. Let Mrs. Miller pay for the consultations from her share of the property after the division, I replied. Mrs. Miller, are you okay with this? Amber stood up and answered in a trembling voice, Yes, Your Honor. Fine. Then this Saturday. Mrs. Miller, have the consultant you select contact Mr. Weston as soon as possible with a time and location. Mr. Weston, you must cooperate fully. If I receive a report from the counselor that you are not cooperating, I may impose sanctions, including modification of the division of property, even if I approve the divorce. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, I replied with a slight shrug. If there are no further questions, the court is closed, O'Connor concluded. Not seeing a reaction from either side, he hit the hammer, stood up, and left. Amber tried to come up to me, apologizing for the arrest and saying she'd received bad advice from the bank's lawyers, but I just said over my shoulder, See you Saturday. When I returned to the office, I dropped the charges against Deputy and Judge St. John and instructed my assistant to notify them of this. I had won this battle now, there was no reason not to be generous. I also sent a bottle of single malt whiskey to Hampton and Sweets with a thank you note. The first consultation session went terribly predictably. Amber showed up looking like a stunning beauty, as if I didn't know she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. I didn't divorce her because of her appearance. The consultant's name was Judith Fell. She had a diploma from an Ivy League university hanging on her wall, and her attitude was evident from the first minutes of conversation. At least she acted professionally when we started. Before we get started, do you have any questions? She asked. Yes, Dr. Fell, I said. How can you be objective if Amber chooses and pays you, or is objectivity not important? Mrs. Miller can pay for my services, but my responsibility is to the court to which my report is sent. The court requires me to be objective. This is not an adversarial proceeding. The goal is reconciliation, not determining a winner or loser, she replied, not at all embarrassed. Any more questions, Mr. Weston? Yes, Dr. Fell. What is the point of this process? I told Amber from the day we met how important fidelity was to me, and yet she slept with another man at least 5 times. I also told her that as a lawyer and then district attorney, I would be extremely uncomfortable with her using illegal substances, but she did when she slept with another man. I don't want to be married to a cheater and an addict, and I won't, I said coldly. Mr. Weston, may I call you Brad? No, Mr. Weston would be quite appropriate, I replied. Fine. Mr. Weston, we need to get to the bottom of why Amber acted the way she did, and what you both can do to help you overcome this. We will discuss what made you a happy couple and how we can get you back to that state, she replied calmly. What if I don't care why she did it, and I don't care if I get over it or not? I asked. It's important for you to get over this, Mr. Weston, and if you still have feelings for Mrs. Miller, the best thing you can do for yourself is to try to make peace. I made a few statements, she made a few more routine platitudes, and then gave the floor to Amber. Her monologue was completely predictable. She talked about the good times we had, that she felt lonely when I started working a lot, that the first night at Barnes's she didn't expect him to attack her, that she drank too much, that she was terrified of her weakness, that she loves me and only me, that she wants to have children from me, and that she will never change again if I give her a chance to make amends. Her speech probably lasted half an hour. My answer was short and clear. She simply wants to avoid financial penalties under the prenuptial agreement for violating, or rather, completely ignoring the fidelity clause. I don't want her to be my wife, period. I want a divorce, it's simple. The consultant tried to ask me, why is this mistake so important to me? Why don't I forgive? Didn't I love her? Blah, blah, blah. My answers were short and to the point. By the end of the hour and 15-minute session, Amber and the consultant had gotten nothing out of me. The consultant gave us several tasks to think about until next time I was barely listening. As we left the consultant's office, Amber caught up with me and grabbed my hand. Brad, I didn't realize you hated me so much and thought so little of me. It's killing me. I can't stand your harsh words anymore. If you meet me for dinner on Thursday before my next consultation and just listen to me, and the next session doesn't change, I will agree to a divorce on your terms. It was hard to reject. What time and where? I asked. Could you pick me up from that is, my condominium at 6 o'clock, and She began. I interrupted her. Where do we meet for dinner? I'm not going to your condominium. She looked depressed. Meet me at the Roxy at 6:30. I'll make a reservation. See you, I said, turned and left. On Wednesday afternoon, while at work, Amber called me. Since she knew I was reluctant to take calls from her, she told my secretary that she was only calling about the Thursday dinner schedule. I started the conversation with a simple, hello. Hi, Brad. Thanks for answering the call. I just went to the doctor and I twisted my ankle badly. Could we have dinner at my condo on Thursday? I'll order food from Ridgewell's because I can't stand to cook, but I'll order crab cakes for you, she said. I saw this as manipulation. She knew that Ridgewell's crab cakes were one of my favorite foods. I don't know, Amber, I began. She interrupted me. Brad, this is not a situation where you can demonstrate the mental toughness that would get you through the SEAL selection process. I think she learned to push the right buttons. It's just a human attitude towards a person you once loved. I told the doctor's office that they can give my medical information to you so you can call and check. Dr. Graham, XXX 555 555. She continued with a hint of desperation in her voice. If your explanation turns out to be true, what time should I arrive? I asked after a long pause. At 6:30, which is how we would meet at the Roxy, she replied with a hint of joy in her voice. Okay, see you, I replied reluctantly. I actually called the doctor's office. The secretary seemed convincing, and after checking her notes, she confirmed that Amber had sprained her ankle. On Thursday, I arrived at Amber's condo right on time. I heard her limping towards the door when I knocked. Why did you knock, Brad? She asked. Seeing my displeased face, she immediately changed the subject. Thanks for coming, Brad. Have you seen the catering van? I saw him drive up as I was getting into the elevator. They should be here any minute, I replied. Why don't you sit down and I'll meet them and show them where to put the food? They won't stay after delivery, right? Thank you, Brad. No, they'll just bring the food and set the table and then leave, she said, limping towards the dining table, which was set with her best crystal and china. The caterers served all the dishes except dessert while we sat at the table and then left. The appetizer was delicious, as were the crab cakes and vegetables. Amber tried to make casual conversation, and I tried to be polite. We talked about neutral topics. At one point, Amber asked me to get another bottle of wine. I wasn't too sure whether she would be able to negotiate the terms of the divorce if she drank more, but I got up and brought it anyway. It took a couple of minutes because her directions on where exactly to look for the wine weren't very accurate. She ended up drinking very little of the second bottle. After dinner, we took glasses of wine and decided to sit in the living room. Could you help me up, Brad? Sorry, but my ankle went completely numb during dinner. I knew what she was leading to, but I could not be rude at that moment, since I expected her capitulation on the division of property. Part of our agreement, Brad, is that I will tell you what happened, and then we will discuss the division of the property. But I can't help but say again how much I'm sorry and how much I love you. I sat like a stone. She seemed to have carefully rehearsed her speech. I was tricked into having sex with Barnes the first time. After we slept for the first time, I was terrified, But then I thought that this was my last affair before we have children. Stupid, selfish, and cheap. I know I'm not trying to make excuses, I'm just telling how it happened. I have no less passion for you, despite your late hours, and the few times I slept with Barnes did nothing to lessen my affection for you. Besides, I've always done everything you wanted in bed for you, she continued, apparently following a carefully thought-out plan. Even though her last words were true, it didn't matter to me. It's strange, but as she spoke, I began to feel strange. At one point, she looked into my eyes and asked, "Brad, are you feeling okay? You don't look good. Is this an allergy to lobster bisque by any chance?" The last thing I remember is Amber limping up to me and grabbing my face. I saw her lips move and heard some sounds, but could not make out what she was saying. Then everything plunged into darkness. I lost and regained consciousness. Another time I thought I heard Millie's distinctive voice and Amber answering her. I woke up in the hospital. When the nurse came into the room shortly after I woke up, I asked her why I was here and how long I had been here. "It's Sunday morning. You got admitted on Friday night and were here all day on Saturday. Your wife was here almost the entire time. She'll be back soon," she replied. It didn't make any sense. "Have you contacted my brother? He is my confidant for medical matters." "No," she replied. "We thought your wife was the confidant." "You must not take any instructions from my wife. If you think that I cannot make decisions for myself, please contact my brother. I'll give you his number," I said insistently, holding her wrist tightly. "I'll call the head nurse," she replied politely. When she left the room, I was very puzzled. I remembered having dinner with Amber on Thursday, but I hadn't been admitted to the hospital until Friday night, and now that I had come to, I felt physically fine except for a little confusion. I was still trying to process everything when Amber walked into the room without a limp. "Brad, darling," she exclaimed, running up to me and taking my hand. "I was so worried about you. Now I'm sure that everything will be fine with you, and we will continue our reconciliation." This helped me clear up some of the confusion in my head. What reconciliation? We had to discuss the division of property. We are not reconciling. "But Brad, why did you make love to me if we weren't going to make peace? And why did you call the office on Friday morning and tell them that you would spend the day and night with me?" she asked in what seemed like a sincere tone, hinting that she was offended by my statement. Over the next 2 hours, Amber told me a very strange story, which did not at all coincide with what I vaguely remembered. Allegedly, I asked her to stop taking pregnancy protection at the beginning of the week, that we had a great chat on Thursday night, that we had 3 sexual intercourse by Friday morning, that I called the office and said I was taking the day off, and that Friday night I had some kind of attack, after which I was taken to the hospital by ambulance. She allegedly stayed with me the entire time, sleeping in my room and leaving only to go to the toilet, get food, or call friends and family to tell me about my condition. She concluded, "Of course, I called the consultant and said we would miss our session on Saturday morning, but she offered to make a substitute if necessary, or we could just come to the next session on Saturday." "Was Millie there?" I asked. The question seemed to take her by surprise, but only for a second. "She arrived shortly before the ambulance arrived because I called her first. She's a nurse." "Not before that?" I asked skeptically. "No, dear, it was just you and me, and it was wonderful," she almost purred. To say I was suspicious would be the understatement of the year. I decided not to argue with her until I cleared my thoughts. I asked her to be alone for a while. "Will you return to the condominium after you check out?" she asked timidly. "We'll see," I replied, although I wanted to say, "Hell no." I just wanted to come to my senses first. An hour after Amber left, I felt much better, and, against the doctor's advice, I stood up and began walking the halls. I didn't feel dizzy, just slightly confused. After lunch, another walk, and writing down notes every time I remembered something important, assigning a degree of confidence to those memories on a scale of 1 to 10. By 6 p.m., I was ready to leave. The nurses told me that Amber called several times to find out when she would be back to either visit me or take me home. I tried my best to slow them down. Finally, at 6 p.m., again against doctor's advice, I checked out, called my friend to take me to Amber's condominium, where I picked up my car parked in the lot across the street and then headed to my apartment. Amber started calling my cell phone almost immediately after I got back to my apartment. Apparently, the hospital told her I was discharged and even showed up at my hotel room door around 10 p.m. I don't know how she found out where I live. Maybe she hired a private detective through Megabank. I didn't answer any calls or knocks on the door. Even though I wasn't in the best shape, I showed up to work on Monday morning. The first thing I did was check with my secretary to see if I had actually called on Friday morning and said I was taking the day off. "Yes, of course you called, Brad," she replied. "What did I sound like?" I asked next. "You sounded a little distracted. I asked you a question about your schedule, and your answer was not related to it, and you said goodbye very quickly, which is uncharacteristic for you when we talk on the phone," she replied with a puzzled expression. "Was this call recorded like most calls to my work phone?" I continued. "Yes, I think I was. By the way, you called your phone line, and not my direct line, as you usually did when you informed me that you would not come to the office. Since the call came through your line, it should have been recorded as per our standard procedure," she replied. "Have the technicians retrieve the tape and make a copy for me, and also inform them that they must preserve the original and treat it as evidence," I ordered. "Right away, Brad," she replied, reaching for her phone and probably dialing it. When I listened to the recording, I recognized my voice, but there was something strange about it, very strange. I sent the recording to the police laboratory for acoustic analysis and asked them to study it and tell me what they thought of it. I didn't want to influence their opinion by talking about my suspicions. I spoke to Amber once this week. I remained calm. I made no commitments other than to attend the next consultation, and of course I did not tell her about my suspicions. At her consultation on Saturday, Amber had a surprise. After telling her story, which I was sure was made up, about how we made love on Thursday and Friday, she made an announcement. "Because Brad asked me to stop taking the pregnancy pills, and I was at the perfect time to conceive, and because Brad was trying so hard in bed, I found out this morning before I came here that I was pregnant," she said with real radiance on the face. I didn't hear what Dr. Fell, the consultant, said. I was so shocked. When I came to my senses, I destroyed Amber's illusions. "Wait, I have a lot of questions about this nonsense," I began. The consultant tried to interrupt me, but I raised my hand and said, "Let me finish." Amber looked scared. Dr. Fell disappointed. "There's no way that if we had sex on Thursday night, just 9 days ago, you could already know you're pregnant," I questioned. "That's not true," Amber said, crossing her arms and stomping her right foot. "My doctor said her test could detect very low levels of HCG, the hormone that indicates pregnancy, as low as 5 mmol. With its very sensitive test, you can get a positive result as early as 7 days after ovulation." I started to protest, but Dr. Fell raised her hand and said, "Let's check this out now, Brad." She sat down at the computer, typed something for a few minutes, and then called me to come to the screen. "It looks like she's right," the consultant said. "It's possible." "How do you know this is my child?" I asked angrily. "Because I took birth control the few times I had sex with Barnes, and I haven't slept with anyone else since we got married," she replied, sobbing. "This is all nonsense," I shouted. "I need to leave," I said, turning to Dr. Fell. "I need to investigate before this consultation makes any sense. When can a prenatal paternity test be performed?" Sitting at her computer, Dr. Fell typed again for a few minutes. 10 to 12 weeks after conception," she replied, and then, turning to me and pointing at the computer screen, she asked, "Would you like to take a look?" I looked at her screen. This was indeed confirmed by the articles she found. In the background, Amber sobbed. "My gynecologist said the same thing." "I will file a motion with the court on Monday to suspend these consultations until the investigation, including the paternity test, is completed," I said, standing up. I hope you understand that, Dr. Fell. She nodded. Amber burst into tears. I left. I filed my petition on Monday, and Judge O'Connor of the family court held a hearing on Friday of the following week. At the hearing, over the objections of Amber's attorney, he granted my motion and authorized the issuance of various subpoenas to obtain Amber's medical records and related documents. Over the next few weeks, I collected a ton of evidence. Here's what I managed to find out, but that's not all. The head of the police audio laboratory was ready to testify that my voice in the call to my office, in which I said that I was taking the day off that very Friday, was edited from several different conversations. Dr. Graham's number was a burner phone number that belonged to one of Amber's friends. She never sprained her ankle. Millie bought devices for artificial insemination 2 days before the ill-fated Thursday, and also in the same month several drugs disappeared from her work. Amber stopped using birth control immediately after the first session with Dr. Fell, the day I agreed to have dinner with her on Thursday, and not at the beginning of the next week, as she told me and Dr. Fell. Amber took a paternity test 11 weeks after conception. Once the test was done, I was ready to take action. After learning what I found out, I was not surprised that I turned out to be the biological father. Amber tried repeatedly to talk to me about the baby she was carrying and to influence the court to change everything. She even called my parents and her parents, asking them to intervene, crying that the child needed a father. The problem for her was that the fidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement did not provide for exceptions in case of a child, and I did not consider myself a potential father, but simply a donor. A week after the paternity test results came back, I had a private meeting with Amber's lawyer. I told him that I could prove that Amber and her nurse friend Millie had drugged me on Thursday night while I was having dinner at the condo, and that they had taken advantage of me several times on Thursday and Friday and continued to do so even on Saturday evening at the hospital. Each time, Millie artificially inseminated Amber, and one of the attempts resulted in a pregnancy. All this time I was unconscious except for those fragments of conversations that I overheard, and which I now knew enough that I could reproduce under oath, and the call to my office was a recorded and edited message. I concluded our conversation with her lawyer by saying that I was willing to turn the case over to a special prosecutor since my office could not handle it due to my involvement and would seek prosecution if I could prove my case. Of course, in family court, I would have to prove everything by a preponderance of the evidence, which is far below the criminal court standard, and Amber would have lost in this case and would have also received sanctions. By that time, her lawyer had seen the light. A week later, Amber agreed to the terms that I initially proposed a 50/50ths division of our common property, not counting $150,000 from Barnes at the time I filed for divorce. Of course, there was no alimony, and I did not demand payment of alimony. The only stipulation she insisted on was that I would provide her with an updated address and telephone number within a week of any move or change of number, in case there were problems with the child, which I interpreted as health problems. The judge would have ordered me to do it even if I had refused, so I agreed. The first thing I did when our divorce was finalized 19 weeks after filing was to call Jen and suggest we celebrate. "You think that now that you're free, I'll just jump into bed with you?" she asked on the phone. Her voice sounded humorous, not annoyed, but I wasn't sure. "No, I just want to thank you for your help with Barnes," I replied sheepishly. "You think dinner and dancing is enough gratitude?" she giggled. "No, but it's a good start," I replied. "What time are you picking me up from home, and how expensive is the restaurant we are going to?" she asked, now with a playful tone. "6:30 on a Saturday night, and it's the most expensive restaurant in the area that doesn't serve innovative cuisine," I laughed. After the next election, the NUDA fired me. I knew this would happen from the day I arrested Judge St. John. I didn't care. I had over $1 million in the bank or the stock market, and was planning to eventually go into civil practice. I was appointed as a consultant to the district attorney in the county where Jen was an assistant district attorney with a salary of $1 a month, but with all expenses covered. I helped Jen prepare and carry out several high-profile cases. When I helped her in the courtroom, I also helped her relax after work, and since we lived together and had the same work schedule, this happened quite often. Amber's baby was a girl, whom she named Rebecca after my mother Miller Weston. Not too obvious, right? Of course, since it was Amber's daughter, she was, in the opinion of everyone who saw her, or even saw pictures of her, including Jen, and not just me, the most beautiful little girl imaginable. I was surprised at how having a baby affected me. This shocked me greatly for several weeks, only constantly reminding myself to stay mentally tough helped me avoid any kind of nervous breakdown or trip to meet the child. Jen sends me photos of little Rebecca, whom she calls Becca, every month, and on my phone even more often. This was not my intention when I agreed to the divorce clause requiring me to provide my current contact information, but I wasn't clear enough about it, so I can't stop the flow. I try not to look at these photographs, but I still look. Then it is usually possible to destroy them, although not always. I don't want to see Becca because being around her, and especially Amber, would be dangerous for me psychologically. I love Jen now, and she should be the center of my life. Even though Jen and I got married, the photos keep coming. My parents have seen their granddaughter numerous times because Amber actively involves them in her life, and they are horrified that I don't want to be a part of her life. If it weren't for Amber, I would want to be a part of Becky's life. But with Amber, it's too complicated. The pain and temptation would be too much of a burden, and it could seriously break me. Now that Becca could talk, Amber began leaving messages on my answering machine on behalf of the girl. The last message was, "Hi, Dad, I love you." I don't know if Amber thinks she can get me back, or if she just wants to confuse me, keep me off balance. If it's the latter, then she's succeeding. After Jen and I got married, we moved 1,500 miles from City X to a state that has a mutual recognition agreement with a state where we worked as a prosecutor. I never told Jen my biggest reason for this move. I just didn't want to be constantly tempted to see Becca and Amber. Breaking up with them became more difficult over time, not easier. I began to question whether my determination to divorce Amber and not give her a second chance was a sign of mental toughness or stupidity, given how difficult the breakup was to get over. I also began to see the fact that Amber manipulated me into having a child with me as a desperate attempt to save our marriage, rather than as something evil and insidious. I couldn't deny that the world was a better place with little Becky. I often think of Judge O'Connor's words. I have seen many couples with situations much worse than what you describe, and they ended up happily married. As soon as I manage to get his words out of my head, I hear Dr. Fell's voice. For your own good, Mr. Weston, you need to get over this, and if you still have feelings for Mrs. Miller, then reconciliation is the best solution for you. On the outside, I'm fine, but on the inside, I keep wondering if breaking up with Amber was an act of mental toughness or stupidity. Jen and I now practice civil law in a small firm in which we have both become full partners. We handle litigation for our firm. Jen is pregnant with our first child. I hope we have at least 2 more. No one knows about the photo of Amber holding our daughter that I keep in my wallet. I understand that keeping this photo does not reflect the toughness inherent in SEALs, but I have come to terms with this weakness. As long as I physically stay away from Amber and Becky and stay close to Jen, I think everything will be okay, even if it's not perfect. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. 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 Click